Okay, good morning, everyone, and what a beautiful sunny morning it is here where I am in the north of England. I hope it's the same for all of you. So just before we do our main introductions, just a few housekeeping rules, if that's okay. We've got colleagues on the call this morning who are going to be sitting behind the chat and the Q&A, so if anything comes up that you would like to call out or address, then please pop that in there. And those colleagues are Emma and Damien. So they'll be sitting there waiting for your amazing comments. So welcome to our Leaders Live today. And we are working on, and our focus is on around supporting teaching excellence and embedding a development culture. So we are focusing on teaching and learning, the core business of every school, and everyone on this call, I'm sure, is acutely aware that for our schools, investing in that most precious resource that is their teachers, their co-professionals, their staff, is just absolutely key to success and year-on-year improvement, and not necessarily just in terms of data and output in that sense. So we're going to be joined this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by Peter Hughes from the Mossbourne Federation, and he's going to talk us through how embedding that culture has taken place and the impact on the whole of that school and trust community. So Peter, lovely to have you with us this morning, and over to you.
Good morning, Louise. Thank you. So yeah, as I said, I'll go through how I think about teaching and learning, how I do at the Mossbourne. A little bit of background for myself, for those who don't know. I come from a sort of an AST background, advanced skills teacher, for those of you who've been around long enough to know what that is. And that's something that we've continued at Mossbourne through sort of Mossbourne Excellent Teachers. And then from there, I became a leader. So, and as a mathematician, I like to look at teaching and learning both from a purely teaching and learning perspective, but also as a mathematician, I like lots of data and lots of information around it, so I can sort of think about how we can tackle it that way. So I always like to, when I'm presenting, to sort of think about a question that I like people to think about, like they like do now, and sort of coming into the lesson. So how much time have you spent on improving teaching this week? And one of the big struggles I always found as even a CEO and as a head teacher or as a leader is actually creating and crafting the time to improve teaching. And I've asked people or asked heads sometimes this, and the answer might be zero, and it might be zero for 2 or 3 weeks, where they haven't actually asked that question or really thought about how much time they're spending. So one of the things I'm thinking about is how can we make that part of our core business and what we do. So many other distractions happen in our weeks, and we can lose focus on what is the day-to-day. So being able to ask that question, ask it of your team, ask it of yourself, and sort of with an honest answer, how much time have you spent on improving teaching within a week? And the second thing I think about is, like, are you obsessed with it? If we as leaders aren't obsessed with it, I would argue that how can we ask our teachers to be obsessed with it? How can we ask anybody else to be obsessed with it? So that obsession's got to start with us. If this is what schools are about, then we've got to be obsessed with our core business, with what we want to happen. So am I obsessed with teaching and learning? Absolutely. Am I obsessed enough? Sometimes I'd argue not, but I definitely am. So, and I kind of started from the very essence of where Mossbourne started. My predecessor said, when asked what was Mossbourne going to do differently, and academies up and down the country, some of them had no walls, people were going to do learning to learn, some people were going to do sort of like project-based curriculum. So Michael, at that time, said, we're going to teach well. That's what Mossbourne's going to do differently. I think we've stayed true to that, and it is one of the things we are obsessed with is teaching well. And teaching and learning comes first above everything within the school. So some of the ways we sort of think about that. So our SLT meeting, every Monday morning at every one of my schools, we have teaching and learning is the sort of core agenda item. And that core agenda item looks at what happened last week, where we saw great practice, where we need to maybe go back and revisit something, or how we'd like to move teaching and learning forward. So every Monday morning, a structured approach, looking at the data for teaching and learning. What does it tell us? How are we going to move that forward? As a head, I used to read every single teacher's feedback every week. That was what I spent my Sundays doing. And my favorite thing for that was, especially if a teacher had been struggling, if I saw they had a good comment or they'd done something well or they kind of finally nailed something, I would just make a beeline to find them and just let them know I noticed they'd sort of got a really good piece of feedback or that was really positive. So being able to read their feedback. All leaders are leaders of teaching and learning. So in my schools, every leader has to give, anyone with a point of responsibility has to give at least one piece of feedback to a teacher every week. It doesn't have to be long. It's 10 minutes maximum sort of in the classroom, 5 to 10 minutes maximum with that person. But that idea of saying, if you're leading and you have a TLR, of some description, that's a teaching and learning responsibility. Let's actually get those people giving people feedback, actually observing lessons. These days, I like to walk around with the principal. I go into a school. What will I see? What's this teacher working on? What's happening in reception? What's happening now in nursery? So does the principal know what's happening within the department? Or if I'm walking on the department head, the same thing. And for us also, we have this teaching learning, a common language. So that I know if I'm talking to one principal or a different principal or a teacher, and no matter which school I'm in, there's a common language and shared language around that. And we use habits. We break our teaching and learning down into different habits. Some people use road and shine, other people use a variety of things. So I talk about what is your language of teaching and learning in school, across your trust, or within the department, because that makes it easier for everyone to talk about. We can reduce that cognitive load. So I will talk a lot about things we talk about with students, but I'll talk about the relation to teachers. I'll talk about reducing cognitive load. We know that works for students, it works for teachers, it works for human beings, and we're no different. So we've got to think about those things we know work for me, for students. I kind of apply the same thing quite often. And then give you an idea. I've got 7 academies, 388 teachers, we're 14 days in, and we've given 191 pieces of feedback. I know precisely, I've got 51 ECTs, I've got 23 teachers who are on UPS scale who haven't got a teacher and a responsibility, and I can go in and find out which teachers have and which teachers haven't had feedback so far this year, and which department will get feedback as well. So I'm obsessed with that. And I'm going to come back to this later, but numbers point, they don't tell you a story. And numbers indicate where you might go and look, but they don't tell you what's happening underneath it, right? Every number is a person or a teacher or a child or a classroom going on underneath that. And that's the kind of core thing. But then you talk about numbers, but also everything underneath that, how you deal with that and how you see it play. So I started with this because if you're going to build a culture of teaching and learning, and you're going to build a teaching culture, ultimately, for me, that starts with being obsessed about teaching and learning. It starts with you as a leader being obsessed with it and really thinking about what's going to happen from there. So, and my obsession is, about how we can do that, how we can make it better. Constantly thinking about how can that be better? Are we doing it right? Are we, as leaders, doing what we need to do? And so to think about this over on a practical level, when I think about these things, I think about implementing something, I think about the people I'm working with, and that's relationships, how to build relationships, how to make those things happen. What data, what information will they need to be able to do a good job? And what systems can I put in place to reduce their cognitive load and allow them to fly? Because systems hold people while they go on. So it's kind of a combination of those things. When I think about a system, if the system's complex and it takes a lot of effort to run, it's not a very good system. And then underneath that, I would say, so know yourself, the teacher knowing yourself, the students know themselves, you as the leader want to know yourself. What's your context? It does matter. I don't mean maths needs to be different in every single school, because I've got maths in Australia, I've got it here, I've got it in the outback, I've got it in the middle of London. It's still maths. What I talk about context is, we work in Thurrock in Hackney, and I know my parents are going to feel very differently sometimes about education, or maybe have a different response to it. That's what I mean by content. And theory is, what does the theory tell us? Have we read it? Do we agree with it? Do we not agree with it? And you know, how valid is that theory? But actually understanding what does work, what doesn't work, what's being debunked, and getting underneath it. So, and if you put the kind of two things together, people data systems, maybe software context on theory set, you can kind of start to piece the puzzle together. In my view. So, if I go back and think, right, so questions I want to know, or I challenge you to say, who is good at? So, with a student, if you're teaching a class, you would know which kids are good at something, which kids need to work on something else. Like I know which kids might be good at expanding brackets. I know which kids struggle with fractions. And I'll know that because maybe I've done homework, or I've done a test, or I've seen them do the work in class, or they've been able to answer a question. So it's no different. Which of your teachers are good at explanations? Which teachers need to work on creating time for practice? Which teachers, how do you know that? Right? What's your evidence base for that piece of information? So as I'm looking at that, you can see I'm talking about those things I would apply to a student, but I'm now applying to my teaching. Or I want my teachers to be able to answer this. I want a student to be able to answer it about their work, and a teacher, I'm good at. I'm good at explanation. I'm good at questioning. I'm good at planning. I'm good at another one. So I'm working on. I'm still working on things. I've got to tell you, I'm a long way to teaching, and I still get told off for not finishing on time when I do teach. Not as much these days, but yeah, I'm still working on plenaries. Never nailed it, and it's like a standing joke about my class coming out on time because they never do. But how do I know that? Well, I've had the bell's gone, and my class is still sitting down, or they're rushing homework down. That's how I know. And I plan and plan and plan for it. I still haven't nailed it, but sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But yeah, does the person know themselves, right? Which comes back to knowing yourself and being able to answer those questions. So, and that precision, they know precisely how they can be better at that, right? And make it work. So this one is sort of looking at it slightly differently. So what's the quality of feedback your teachers receive? So when you look at your leaders or look at yourself and you ask that question, what is the quality of feedback? How do you know? So for example, I said earlier on, I can read all the feedback. So I really think about the idea of feedback, and how do I know? Because I've read it. And or we've recorded it, and we've got that recorded. So we're recording those snapshots, we can read through that and understand what the quality of feedback is. Because if teachers aren't getting good feedback, how do we know? We can't look at the teacher and say, well, they're not improving, right? We wouldn't look at a student and say, well, you're not receiving good classroom teaching, and therefore why haven't you actually got an A grade? Well, we've got to make sure they do. So I tend to look at leaders first, look at myself, what are we doing? Am I putting a big enough focus on it? And my principals, and so forth on the way down. And kind of the last person I asked the question of is the teacher. And so I'm going to kind of take us on that journey. And lots of ones know, and some people assume it's about perfection. I like perfection. I'm striving for it every day. And this is a phrase I struggle with, but it's also something I believe, right? Perfection is the enemy of progress. So if we're thinking about creating a culture of teaching and learning, then the first thing I'm thinking about is, you know what? Just do something. Create a rubric. So what does teaching and learning look like in yours, or in your trust, or in your department? Create something. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be one you borrowed. If you want one afterwards, I'll give you the multiple habits. Just something so you know what you're measuring yourself against. Then just start providing that feedback. But you're going to capture that. You've got all of that feedback, and you're starting to capture that data. Then you can analyze that data, give your obviously Monday mornings, and you look at that as head of teaching and learning, you look at that as head of department, and then start to take action. And then go back to the top. The first thing you spot is you hate your own rubric. I'm on rubric 6, I think now, in the last 10 years, because as you know, as we become more advanced or understand teaching and learning more, as research changes, as things happen, we're changing our rubric to match it. Sometimes it's big changes, sometimes it's small. We originally had a rubric that just mirrored the Ofsted. I wouldn't do that ever again. But back then, I was young, I was new leader. Everyone was worried about that, and that's what we did. But now we've got a rubric that really focuses on teaching and learning, breaks it up into how we think about it. It's not based on the teaching standard, it's based on how we want teaching and learning to be in the school. And it helps teachers understand how we want that to be. So go back, I would say just start providing that feedback, just start analyzing it, just start taking some action from that. Because you keep going around that sort of plan, do, check, act sort of cycle. As I said, what does the theory say? It works. And if you can keep going back around there, then you can get a better picture. But if you don't capture the data, you've got no way of knowing. Which of my leaders are good at feedback? Might have assumptions. What are my teachers working on? Do my teachers know what they're working on? Does the feedback teachers are receiving relate to what people think they're doing? How do you know what's happening in terms of developing team learning is aligned to CPD, is aligned to everything else? And so for me, this is where it starts. I've got to sing this. It's still cutting out the volume. Am I fine?
Sorry, Peter.
Can you hear me?
You broke up. I think you're breaking up a little bit. So if you do have headphones, that might help. Or
I don't have them beside me. That's not helpful, is it?
Okay.
I will lead into it a bit more, and we'll see if we go from there. If not, it might be my actual. So I'll change where the camera. I'll change what I'm talking to, in terms of change the speakers or the microphone picking it up on. So that's that idea of coming back, just getting something down and just start working on it, and then you can start to iterate on that. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I think sometimes teaching we're always trying to get perfection rather than kind of just get started and start to develop something that you can then iterate on. So in this, so what are the challenges? I think for me, when I think about the challenges that I faced when we were trying to sort of do this for the first time, and really dig in and start to sort of capture the information and capture the data in a way that I felt was really sustainable. If I go back, most of my leaders got stuck on point 2. They provided the feedback, and then they go provide some more feedback. And they go back in and provide some more feedback. Or 5 different leaders would go in and provide a teacher with feedback. So the teacher had lots and lots and lots of feedback. But nobody's really thinking about how do we move the teacher forward, or what might we do around department CPD, or what CPD we might put on for the school. Nobody was sort of analysing their data, thinking about who might come in to help us with that, or how we might go about it, or what action we need to take. So one of the biggest things is we quite often get stuck at point 2. And we'll see that, right? Who's been there where you've gone in and provided feedback, come back 2 weeks later, you give the person more feedback and you go, why haven't you moved? What's wrong with you? And you're looking at them and wondering why I gave you feedback, I told you what to do, and then you haven't moved forward. We've got to think about, do they actually know, right? Just because you told them doesn't necessarily mean they understand or they get what they need to do. So for me, a lot of people get stuck there. And you've got to find, especially new leaders, actually, no, it's always just new leaders, but get stuck there. They go around, they keep measuring it, and they weigh it, and they measure it, and they weigh it, and they measure it, and they weigh it, and they go, I know exactly what's wrong with my school. Okay, good. Now what are you going to, so what becomes the question. So what have you done about it? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to move this forward? I'm not putting all the onus on leaders. Teachers have to improve themselves. We want teachers to have autonomy and everything like that, but we quite often get stuck at point 2. And another thing we think about is what you see is people say focus on something like behavior, which is easy to kind of comment on, or they comment on marking because that's really easy. Yes, it's done or it's not done. Or they, when they're analyzing something, they fall for showmanship over teaching. And we'll all see the person who can pull that out of the bag. They do a really good lesson. So they're the things I'm always thinking about. How do we get over those things? So, or a classic would be, did they actually teach the curriculum, right? So one of the things we're really working on now is when somebody goes in to give feedback, can they have access to that curriculum and see that so they know whether the curriculum's taught? So imagine that like the best lesson that's taught, but it doesn't teach the curriculum, is like that brilliant essay that never answers the question, with 0 marks, right? They can write a great essay, but if they can't answer the question, there's a problem. So I taught a really good lesson, but the kids didn't learn the curriculum. We've got to really think about that and think about it. They've got all the techniques and skills, but are they delivering what we need them to deliver in order for kids to go forward? Otherwise, we're wasting our time crafting that curriculum up. So they're sort of things, they're the big ones I've always found and getting over it. And the other one is going in drop-ins. We believe in drop-ins. Unions, another one. How do we get over that problem? The staff saying, you're always in my lesson. Don't you trust me? Are some of the other things. Most of these things are about how leaders respond to a bad lesson. My answer is, if someone has a bad lesson, okay, I'll come back tomorrow. That's fine. You have a good lesson, I'll also come back tomorrow. Because one good or bad lesson doesn't make a teacher, right? Some people might disagree with me, but I love the old word of typicality. I just want to know what you're like on a typical day. Like, is it consistent? Are the kids getting a consistently good deal? I've taught lessons that are awful. I mean, really awful, where I'm embarrassed and somebody's watched me doing it. I'm just getting slowly more embarrassed. Even as a leader, I've done that. Or I've also got great lessons where I think, wow, that was the best lesson ever. And what I'm aiming for is kind of somewhere in the middle of that all the time. I just want to lift the level of consistency up. And I want to do that across the piece. So I believe in drop-ins because I want to see people's normal practice. But we have to accept that normal practice might be boring. They might be doing a test. It may not be what we want it to be. And that's fine, right? Because we want to build a picture over time, where little and often. You see research, little and often does work, lowers the stakes, and therefore you're more likely. Or I used to stand up and just say to people, I'll come and visit you when you want me to. Let me know. I'll book it in. I'd love to come and visit you. Opening the culture and sort of allowing teachers to invite you in. Very few people did, surprisingly. But it's that idea of they have the ability to do that. So yeah, sort of think about that, building that culture and being able to answer those questions. And how do you want to answer the questions? And how do you make sure your teachers can? And for me, before I move on to sort of tracking progress, I'm going to say, when you're building the culture, it's all about the way leaders react. If you're doing drop-ins for the first time and you're recording and you're capturing that information, and the first time somebody has a bad lesson, you land on them with a ton of bricks, you can imagine the response to that. Or the first time they have a really good lesson, you're like, yeah, this is amazing, it's the best thing ever since sliced bread, and you treat that like amazing. No, everything is just part of the big puzzle you're trying to work out. And it's about moving the person forward one step at a time. That's how you create a culture. It's every small interaction as a leader you have with every single person to create a culture. From briefings to SLT, to the playground, to meetings, to all of those things, all of the matters. So I'm going to ask you a question, like, so we're talking about this idea of, and we'll come back to the thing, tracking good practice. Anybody come in and say, this is brilliant? You're in a room, you go, wow, that's brilliant. I love that start. I love the do now. You've really nailed it. Or, it's really solid. I like that. Yeah, happy with that. Or you walk out and think, oh, you know what? The starter was brilliant. I think the way you introduced the question was really solid. But, you know what? When the kids got down to work, the environment wasn't quite right. People were working independently or they weren't working as they wanted to. You know, that area needs to work. And so I'm going to argue you're rating your teachers. in your head, you are saying they're highly effective, they're effective, or they're developing. And we all do it, right? We all say, I really like that, I don't like it, or that's going to work. So we're doing that, but we're not capturing it. And so I'm going to argue, I rate elements of lessons. And this makes it easy. Sorry, Joe, I'll lean forward. This makes it easy to get some high quality data at the other side. Portion of the numbers, don't let them drive everything you do. But if you say, I like this element of the lesson, it might be do now, or one of the habits they do well in, then you can look at evaluating elements of lessons. And I think that's feasible to do. For me, that works. There's risks associated with it. I'll talk a little bit about it as we go on. But for me, we are doing this. We are saying to people, this is brilliant, this is solid, this needs work. Effective, highly effective, developing. That's what's happening in our heads. If we capture that information, share that with the teacher, we can start to build a really strong picture over time. And that's what I would call a rating. I would never ever rate a lesson in totality. That's like rating a person in totality. And you are this type of person. No, I might be good at math. I might struggle at English. I might find really difficult. I might be really good at sport. I have different elements you can rate, and we can do the same with lessons. We're not saying the teacher is that. We're just saying what we scored today was. As I said, how we respond becomes more important to actual rating. I know the research says you shouldn't. Some research says you shouldn't. I can go into that a little bit more. And then some research says that as long as you get a broad up picture of the mistakes and you're going to have people involved and some of the leaders, you end up back in the picture. Very similar to Brown. So, as we're doing that, what I'm saying to you is the risk here is numbers point. A number might say this person's not doing well, but they're an ECT. There's a reason they don't know how to control a class yet. Is there an ECT? So the same number for an ECT versus a head of department versus a member of SLT might mean something very different. Maybe somebody's teaching out of their subject for you, doing you a favor. So yeah, we're going to see some variation. Get underneath it, right? Yes, have the numbers there to point you in the direction. Get underneath those numbers. So I'm as worried about somebody with a perfect record. Every lesson is amazing. I'm wondering what's happening because everyone has a bad thing, in my view. There are a few teams that don't just seem to nail it every day, day in, day out, but bad days are normal. And so I sort of go through that. I'm going to try and switch my sound to a different, if that will work. I'm going to remember. Down. Let me see if I can switch it across to is that better at all?
Yeah, it is.
Fine. That will work a lot better then. Different microphone. So the numbers point you in a direction, which is really good. And think about that, right? I get very worried when people look at numbers and say that school's rubbish or that person is, because it means we haven't dug underneath it. So when we evaluate a lesson, it's the text and a rating is applied to both things that are done there. We don't always do that for every coaching lesson. So for me, the numbers point, what's underneath it that really matters. I'm glad that everyone's much happy with the volume there. Should have done that earlier. So, and then I'm thinking about like evidencing that CPD impact, right? So going back. So I'm going to go back and keep this really simple, right? So if you were looking to do CPD impact, feedback is CPD, right? I think it's the biggest piece of CPD most teachers will ever get. In the same way that one of the best things a student can receive is they get feedback from you on how to improve their work. So I think we're going to first start by arguing that high quality CPD is high quality feedback, right? So I always start there. It's not about going out of school. It's not about doing something extra. Sometimes it's just about receiving
that feedback that allows you to move to the next stage, right? That's what we do with ECTs. Why is it different for a mainstay teacher versus the person on pressure? Why would it be any different if I'm teaching? If I'm teaching maths, I have an expectation the head of the department will come and check that I'm teaching and give me some pointers on how I can improve. Regardless of my position, for all classroom teachers, the moment we step beyond the threshold and pick up the chalk. Not that anyone picks up chalk these days, but I picked up chalk for the first time, so that's exactly what it is for those who have. And okay, as I said, feedback is the best CPD. That's it. It is the best. So, but again, I'm going to come back to so are you obsessed with teaching and learning? Are your structures designed around being able to do that? So, for example, we have 8 inset days, not 5 at Mossbourne. 3 of those we take as twilight, and the other 5 we've kept. I'll explain what we do with those 3 twilights as well. We have a marking week. So my students finish a week early, and my teachers say mark the work so they've got time to mark. Why would I want my teachers marking while they're trying to teach all their classes and do everything else? Something's going to give. And generally what we find, that's the quality of teaching at the end of the year. We teach up until the very last day. Well, actually, we teach up until exam start, and then kids go into exam mode. Then the kids leave, and we do marking week afterwards. So we're prioritizing that when teaching's happening, it's super high quality every single time, and nothing just stop that. Department time. My department, I'm given lots of department time. Every inset day, lots of department time, because now in a secondary, we're going to say department time. In a primary, it might be a phase lead, or it might be the reading lead, it might be maths lead, it might be looking at history. It could be a whole variety of things, but what is it that teachers need in order to help them get better at their craft? It's going to be time with the people who are expert at that. And so in secondaries, that's not my sort of secondary phase because I'm a secondary teacher. Maths teachers actually discussing maths and how maths are going to be delivered and going through the curriculum and how that delivery is going to work. That's highly valuable, right? So we shut early on a Thursday, and we have inset on a Thursday afternoon. And so that fits in again, regular and often, right? Regular and often, low stakes, rather than big, here's the big hoo-ha day, and we've brought some external person in to tell us all about teaching and learning, and then everyone forgets about it a day later. I've been there, I've sat through that, and as I've got older, I've got more and more annoyed at sitting through those sessions. I wouldn't like to say I've got jaded, but I now understand what those jaded people that I was trying to when I was a young, enthusiastic teacher to do. So structuring your school that focuses around teaching and learning is a really powerful thing. So I'm going to come back to this idea, and I said earlier when we talked about the numbers, what you measure matters. Right? That's absolutely in the theory. We know whatever we measure, people will put more focus on. So if you're measuring teaching and learning, people will put more focus on it. If you're measuring assessments, people will put more focus on the assessment. If you're measuring exclusions, they'll put more focus on not having exclusions. Whatever you measure matters, right? People can't hold hundreds of things in their head. I measure teaching and learning, first and foremost. Nothing should get in the way of teaching and learning. I'll give you an idea. In my school, we have for the ICT team, there's something called a teaching and learning emergency, right? And we have a number that rings every IT person's phone. And so if somebody can't teach and that's caused by an ICT issue, somebody rings them and somebody from IT will come ASAP to that room. And that takes priority over every other ICT thing that's going on. We want that ICT fixed because that's blocking the teacher from teaching the way they plan that lesson. That's what I mean by that. Somebody will say to me, sorry, I can't meet you, I'm teaching, right? A whole bunch of other stuff. So it's really critical to say, what are you doing? How are you measuring it? And what are you allowing to get in the way? So TAs teach, right? Do you hold them to the same standard as teachers? Yes, we do. We've got to help them get there. We shouldn't say, but if they're being given a class, why would we have a different standard of the quality of that teacher to the standard of the quality of teaching which needs to be the teacher? So Everybody who is teaching lessons to a child or working with a student needs to assess what's happening, and we need to treat it in exactly the same way. And sometimes we've got the most vulnerable students, not necessarily always without our strongest teachers. Right? That's a bit weird, but we keep doing it. So what are we doing? Who's running the intervention? Right? Is the what's wrong with the TA teaching the lesson if those kids already understand? And actually, maybe the teacher's working with some vulnerable kids who haven't understood it. And controversial, I know. But who is best doing what? Becomes the question. But maybe the TA is expert at intervention and we've skilled them up. Right? I've seen some amazing TAs in my primary schools, and some of them I don't know why they're not teachers. They are absolutely amazing and undervalued, I think, sometimes resource. But we've got to invest in them in the same way. Yes, like I said earlier, the numbers might point. Maybe they're not doing as good as they can. How do we invest in skilling them up? Maybe they want to become teachers full time. Maybe they don't. That's also okay. So it's what we measure matters. So if I give you an idea of how we do that, we don't ask teachers, generally speaking, to give us any more information for the threshold. Because we've been capturing how their teaching and learning goes, we've got all their data from their exams, their form is very short. And we've already got all of the feedback from the last 2 years, we've got the appraisals, we've got everything else already there. So we've already measured it. Why would you measure it again or ask them to go and remeasure it? We want them to assess themselves to see if they meet the criteria, but we want that self-assessment hopefully to become the kind of thing. Appraisal. Is your appraisal joining all of your teaching and learning feedback as long-term habits, right? So what are they working on in the long term, again, versus the short term? And linking those two things together, really critical. So underneath the sort of teaching and learning thing, instead of just talking about the outcomes, are we talking about, first point here, the criteria? Let's talk about the quality of the teaching. Let's actually walk through their lesson feedback for the year and see if they've moved forward. See which habits they need to work on. See which habits they're really good at. And capability, same thing. Every single time a teacher in my school, if we have had to be there, it's the sad part of the profession, but I don't use any other information than the information the teacher has already got, right? And I will definitely ask one question first. Am I happy with the quality of feedback they've received? Because if it's not, then I would look at the leadership first and then the teacher second. Because to me, that's where our focus needs to be. So I have a completely transparent culture. Every single piece of information I have about a teacher, the teacher has as well. And I refuse to use anything else. Because in my mind, I don't believe in secret squirrel information about people. I don't want stuff about me, and I don't think it's fair that I would do. So everything trying to be as transparent as possible. And so I thought this was really good. So, if you look at this graph, this is real, and you were to say which subject did the best. This is the average subject rating for teaching and learning. 3 being like highly effective, 2 being effective. It's a weighted average towards the end of the year, so more recent stuff is more valuable than before. If you look at that, which subject do you think would have done the best? Would it surprise you that writing was the highest, reading was second highest, and math was the third highest? So when we get outcomes, even when it's really good, we look back and say, does our data line up with what we're saying about teaching and learning? Now, caution, this is year 6. Maybe they came out of year 5 with really bad math grades, but math has been taught really well, and they've made lots of progress, so let's be cautious. So again, numbers point, but they don't tell you the whole story, right? Really important, but have you ever looked at the quality of teaching and learning on average compared to the grades when you get them back externally? Really interesting, very interesting. I've been caught out before where I realized poor geography results, looked at it, realized no one had been in. No one had been into the room. We didn't know what was going on. That's on us. What about this? What is the quality of teaching for? Have we looked at a year group? Is year 8 receiving a lower quality? A year 13 seems to be which we're putting out our really good teachers. Is that the right balance? Maybe we've decided it is. What about my year 7s? We want them to get better teachers. So what are my teachers, what are my students receiving? By subject, by year group, particular habit? How are we looking at that and deciding what they're receiving? Again, this is real. Okay, it's not a made up piece of data. This is actually from my school from last year. And you know, does it work? Everything I've said, does it work? So I would argue it appears to be. I would never say it is, because you're only as good as your last result. So we had 2 schools in the top 10 when it came to Progress 8. We took on 2 schools in Thurrock last year. We had a 0.5 and a 0.6 increase in our attainment 8 last year, which means that both schools went from minus 0.5 and minus 0.7. We think that had there been Progress 8 this year, they'd be very close to being at 0. 50% of A's and A-star grades, reading, writing, and maths were combined at 85 and 92%. GDS in reading in our primary schools was 43 and 46%. Our pupil premium, so that 43 GDS was a school with 60% pupil premium. To me, it does work. Is this the only thing? Of course not. There's amazing teachers. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. But I think our focus on teaching and learning allows us sometimes to get rid of a lot of that noise and focus on what matters. And that's what's happening inside that classroom day in, day out. Because a school is only as good as what happens in the classroom. Now, you can't be any better than that. You can't get better than that, because that's where it happens on the ground. And I want to leave you with a thought. Don't focus on the outcome. Focus on the quality of the feedback. It took me years to realize that I was producing a whole bunch of data about student outcomes that I never actually really looked at. I realized I was reading the feedback, and that was what was making the difference. So if teachers are getting high quality feedback and you are confident behind that and you're using that information to drive teaching and learning forward, the exams and the results will take care of themselves. Yes, we look at them, but I don't obsess over data. I obsess over the quality of teaching and learning data, not over the outcome data, because the horse has bolted, and I check my teaching and learning data aligns to that. Where it doesn't, I want to know why. But this is the data I care about, and the data I spend the most time looking at, the data I spend the most time talking about. Surprisingly, not all the outcome data, and I don't cut it up in like a million ways that some people might do. This is it. This is the data for me, and it's the data that really matters, because this is the live data that's happening in your classrooms day in, day out. I hope I've explained that, and it's been worthwhile. But yeah, thanks for questions.
Thank you, Peter. I think that was just an amazing run through there of everything that you're doing in your schools. And I think really, you know, that the real passion around it is the core business. It's everyone's core business. It's the language of all of your schools, all of your staff. I think also that came through is that, you know, we talk to our teachers, don't we, about really know your children, know your family, and that whole premise of, as leaders, that's exactly where we've got to start with those that we're entrusting those children with. So again, I'm sure the people on this call, this is not new information, and this is the sort of thing that they're doing, but I think just holding that core business and not being, like you said, distracted by the noise of other things that may well be coming in. And you know, we all know what it's like when you're in the depths of the day-to-day. It's easy to be distracted, and that whole sentiment around the common language, the feedback and the quality of that is therefore how you then embed that culture. It's sort of, you know, everyone understands it, everyone knows it, and that's where your starting point is, you know, almost regardless of what sort of level of experience your co-professionals have got. You know, the resonation with myself around, you know, the TAs are amazing, and as you said, often undervalued. And I'm not saying necessarily in any of our schools, but just in general, I think is, you know, the consensus there. But, you know, yes, give them that opportunity to work with a whole class and have that most expensive resource work with those children that need it absolutely the most in terms of interventions, etc. So that was a really great presentation today. I don't think we actually have any questions. I think you've just stunned everyone into silence.
Sorry to interject. We do have some questions in the chat, Louise, rather than the Q&A.
Right.
Do you want me to pull some out, or do you want to go through?
If you could pull some out for me, Emma, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a question that's come in. It's actually one of the last questions that's come in from Philip Wright. Thanks, Philip, for your question. With new teachers to your trust, how do they respond to continual drop-ins? We have regular drop-ins, but some of the embedded teachers are not kind of receptive to feedback. So any tips on navigating that?
So we're clear. So I would say we start that at interview. So like anything, the earlier you can start something, Philip, the better. So if you can, we tell people interview, that's where it's going to be. We are try and be as clear as possible about who we are as an organisation. But also, it doesn't matter how many times I say to somebody, we're going to do this, or you're going to drop in. Some people don't realise that's actually going to happen because, well, we're teaching for a long time and we've all heard somebody say something's going to happen and not happen. So for me, it's about making sure that how we are clear that it's going to happen, and that we do go in and we do drop in, that we do listen to their worries or what their objection is. But the biggest piece of thing is how we respond to a good or a bad lesson, so that they understand that it's not going to be it's just not going to happen that somebody's going to land on something bad's going to happen. We're looking for that typicality and ways to move them forward. So that's where I found it. In terms of, this might touch on the union issue, I've tended to take the approach that there's 3 hours in the union piece. So that's, I know some unions said it should be only 3. I take 3 hours. If I do 10 minutes each, that's a lot of drop-ins I can do, and we can get on with it. So, but for me, we're focusing on improving teaching and learning, and we tend to, if somebody keeps objecting to that, I would go as far as saying, look, are we the right school for you? That doesn't mean there's not a school out for them. I'm not casting aspersions on their teaching. I'm just simply saying we've all got to find our own home where we feel the most comfortable as a teacher.
Thanks, Peter. Emma, do you have any more?
Yeah, so we've got a few, but I'll just pull out a couple. So we had a question, which I think you may actually have answered, but just in case, how often are the drop-ins done?
Yep. So we don't put the focus on the teacher. I put the focus on the leader. So I want my leaders to do a minimum of one piece of feedback per week. And so at SLT, the Teaching and Learning Lead checks that that's happened. And there's a bit of a naming and shaming of SLT as opposed to of teachers. And then we want the Teaching and Learning Leads and heads of department to then look at that data to see if there are teachers missing, teachers they need to maybe put more effort into. So we look at it from that perspective in terms of the onus is on the leaders to develop teaching and learning. And then we analyze the data to see which teachers might need, have been missed out, or a particular area that we need to focus on. And so we go from that side first. And I know that's not the usual thing where you're like X teacher receives X amount each week. Some teachers need 20 pieces because they may be working on something. But I'd also make sure that every single one of our teachers, even our head teachers, are receiving feedback.
Thank you, Peter. We've got another question that's come in, and obviously you mentioned that you sort of tweaked your provision and tweaked your sort of timetabling, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. And the question that's come in is, so what happens, or what do the children do during your marking time and that department time?
So during marking time, kids go home.
Right.
So with their parents.
Perfect.
Taking all the early flights and saving money for those who can afford it. Yeah. So our children get a longer summer holiday because otherwise we're distracted again doing 2 different things. In terms of, we have a longer Monday and Tuesday. So we make up for the time. We finish slightly later Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we finish earlier on a Thursday and half day on a Friday.
Okay. And then we've just got one more. that just says, oh, hang on, sorry, I've just got two more. Releasing leaders to be able to drop in requires cover and time. Obviously, that then is time is money, so to speak. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so we don't do cover unless we absolutely, there's this really specific reason. So we don't try to do that. So because of the way we operate it is that anybody dropping into that lesson, the leader can see all that feedback. So if it's a Key Stage 3 maths lesson, they can read all the feedback of Key Stage 3 maths. If they're a Key Stage 3 lead, if they're the head of maths, they can read all the maths information. If you're line managing maths, you can read all of that. So as a leader, you've got access to everybody else's feedback where it's gone in. So it's about aggregating that information up to look at the best way forward. So we don't release leaders specifically to do this, which for me is kind of going against the value of nothing interrupts teaching and learning. So if we're taking people out to make sure the teaching and learning is going well, we're kind of defeating the purpose. So we have, for a head of department, they do 16 periods. For a SLT member, it ranges from 12 periods. And for somebody with a responsibility, we'd probably give them a period off. And I always look to say, if there's something you're doing that we can get rid of, let us know so we can get rid of that, because the teaching and learning thing has to come first. So that's the biggest priority. And we try to then plan where we can plan the rest of the time out in order to make sure that they're able to do that. But I'm also a realist. Teaching's a damn hard job, and there's no substitute for just putting the work in. There's no secrets. There's no secret to kind of and shortcuts sometimes in teaching to get there. In terms of how do we measure feedback, we have 9 habits around the curriculum, behavior for learning, some of the usual things you expect, very close to some of the Rosenstein principles. And we just, when we go in, we tend to look at 1 or 2 of them, and we'll say that what we saw was effective today, highly effective, or needs some work. And then there'll be a summary comment, very brief about that. So it's evaluative, so we can see why. That allows other leaders to see it. Otherwise, it becomes impossible to know what the person saw. And then we tend to have an action step where a teacher has no more than 3 action steps at a time. Otherwise, they become overloaded, in my view. So it's about when a leader goes in, they're picking up from where the last leader left off, because they can see all the information, they can see the action step, and the onus is on the leader to move it forward from that point forward. So every time we go in, we do that, except where it's a deliberate coaching observation, where we may take the rating off for a period of time to allow the person purely to focus on the driving forward of where they are, under a number of circumstances where we would do that. Otherwise, every senior leader can drop into any person's class, including other senior leaders' classes, at any point in time throughout the day. Okay. We have a rule that if somebody's already dropped in, you can just tell the leader somebody's already come into this lesson. You don't need to come in again.
That sounds like a good rule.
Yeah, but it's given the teacher agency, right? It's about them.
Absolutely.
How's it recorded? I've got a system that I developed internally called Progress Teaching, which we use to record all that information, which connects to the MS and then pulls that forward.
Okay.
This
is a long one.
Protecting them from undue stress. How do you create a positive, supportive culture around feedback? So the positive supportive culture is about how leaders respond. So it might seem maybe oversimplifying, but if I keep saying at the ton of bricks because I recall it. I lived under high pressure, high stakes observation culture, and I put this in place about 10 years ago. I just say, look, it doesn't matter. If it's bad, we'll come back in. If it's good, we'll come back in. We create an environment where we're looking to see if that's a long-term thing or a short-term thing, and trying to understand what's going on. Yes, it does add stress for some people, but for me, it's about how we respond to that really, really matters. And that's in the leader's gift.
Okay, so thank you, Peter. I think we've covered thoroughly the premise of today's session, which was around exploring teacher excellence and developing and embedding that teaching culture across the school, teaching and learning being the core business of everyone within the establishments, it being the language of everyone, not being distracted, and then using what you see to provide really high quality feedback, which is, you know, I'm in 100% agreement that that is the best CPD that you can possibly have as a teacher, be on the receiving end of, but equally the best as a leader in terms of developing your whole school and developing the environment. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. The recording will be available following the session for people that have joined. In true teacher style, maybe not yours, Peter, I'm going to give people 4 minutes back. And have a great day, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.